People with low cholesterol level tend to die more. We see that consistently in large population studies. And so this has become a frequently asked question. So I decided to ask Dr. Chris Packard about this. He is professor of vascular biochemistry at the University of Glasgow, and he's really one of the top experts on the planet on heart disease, cholesterol, and inflammation. The cholesterol level and the mortality, this is still a frequently asked question. There is an association between lower levels of cholesterol and actually within the normal range and a higher risk of mortality in some of these epidemiological studies. And so a lot of people have taken that to mean that lowering cholesterol or even normalizing cholesterol causes risk of death to go up. What's our scientific understanding of that?
It's cause and effect and cause. Having cancer lowers your cholesterol. Having all kinds of other diseases lowers your cholesterol. So in other words, you have the disease and that causes the low cholesterol, not the low cholesterol causing the disease. Again, I go back to the hard-nosed clinical trial evidence that says in all these trials, in hundreds of thousands of people, lowering cholesterol to very low levels has no perceptible effect on non-cardiovascular death, cancers and anything else. So these U-shaped associations that you see in all of the big populations are due to the fact that even having a hidden disease can cause you to have a low cholesterol. And if you take individuals who are healthy, then that dip up at the bottom goes away, and you end up with a nice association that is linear all the way down to very low levels. So the negative association of low cholesterol with other diseases is driven by the other diseases, not the low cholesterol.
So Professor Packard is explaining that many chronic diseases lower cholesterol levels. This includes severe malnutrition, critical physical illness, malabsorption, liver disease, blood disorders, cancers, infections, and on and on. And this is for several reasons. First, when people are sick, they tend to eat less and they tend to lose weight, and that causes cholesterol to drop. Also, these diseases can affect absorption in the gut, so less cholesterol gets absorbed in the first place. And finally, diseases like cancer suck up cholesterol from the blood. The actual cancer cells take up a lot of cholesterol from the bloodstream to support their rapid growth and multiplication. So for all these reasons, it's common to see in people who have these chronic diseases, cholesterol levels slowly drift down with time. And Professor Packard also referred to clinical trial evidence. So just show you one example of that real quick. So this large study looked at 26 randomized trials where cholesterol was lowered with medication. So if lowering cholesterol raises risk of dying, then these people who have their cholesterol lowered should die more, right? Well, we see exactly the opposite. Not only was there a reduction in major vascular events like heart attacks and strokes, but all-cause mortality, which means total deaths, were reduced. So these people are living longer. And this is largely due to reductions in deaths due to coronary heart disease, whereas there was no change in deaths due to cancer or other non-vascular causes. So lowering cholesterol reduces the risk of dying of heart disease, cardiovascular diseases, doesn't seem to affect the risk of dying of other causes that are not vascular. And so the net effect is a lower total risk of death. Yeah, I saw one study that adjusted for malnutrition, and that was enough, if I remember correctly, that was enough to eliminate that tail that goes up. So that's pretty striking. Just malnutrition alone, I guess, in the context of cancer or some of these chronic diseases of old age, that kind of brought that tail to the null range. So here I was referring to this study where they saw the death risk go up as the cholesterol got lower. They're looking at non-HDL cholesterol, which is basically all the cholesterol except for HDL, but it's the same logic as LDL or total cholesterol, all the same principle. As the cholesterol level gets lower and lower and actually into the normal range, death risk shoots up. So this is the raw data. Now, when they adjust for age and also a number of pre-existing diseases, then it looked like this. That rise in death that we saw on the left of the previous graph, that's all or virtually all gone. So that's saying it was older people and sicker people who showed that trend of increasing death risk on low or normal cholesterol. Then they adjusted for malnutrition status, and it comes down even more. And then adjust for everything, all the factors we mentioned so far, all together, and it's pretty much a perfect straight line up. The higher the cholesterol level, the higher the risk of death. So basically, in people who already have a chronic disease or who are malnourished, low cholesterol correlates with higher risk of death. But in people who don't have those, in healthy individuals, the higher the cholesterol level, the higher the risk of death. Here's another way to look at the same data. So raw data, no adjustments, higher risk of death with lower cholesterol. To the right of that vertical line is higher risk of death. When you adjust for age and pre-existing chronic diseases, no significant effect of having lower cholesterol. And then when you adjust for malnutrition status, lower risk of death with lower cholesterol. And you adjust for everything at the same time, similar result. But yeah, I think the strongest argument is, like you said, the randomized trials, and then the genetics also. And then in the genetics, same as the randomized trials, if anything, we see lower mortality with lower cholesterol. And the randomized trials, when we look at meta-analyses, same thing. We tend to see lower mortality. So I just don't see how that could be cause and effect from the epidemiological studies. So here we're referring to clinical trials. We already touched on those, and also genetics. So there are genetic studies where they look at people who have low cholesterol from birth, right? So it's genetically determined. And so if having low cholesterol kills, if it raises risk of dying, then these people should die more. But we see exactly the opposite. They die less and they live longer. In this study, for example, people with higher genetically determined ApoB or LDL cholesterol, they had more coronary disease, that's expected, but also higher all-cause mortality, so total deaths, and cardiovascular deaths. And that effect was dose-dependent. So they're dying more over the period of observation. They're dying younger than folks who don't have high genetic ApoB or LDL cholesterol.
I mean, with many reasons to suspect and know that it is the disease that's causing the low cholesterol, or one aspect of the disease. If you've got cancer, you don't eat. And if you don't eat, your cholesterol goes down. If you've got other diseases, you don't eat so well and your cholesterol goes down. Or you lose body weight, or you lose mass and your cholesterol goes down. It's just one of these things that happens. Cholesterol is a nutritional indicator. That's where the malnutrition comes in, as well as an indicator of risk of heart disease.
Yeah, and the other interesting thing is that other parameters have the same association. So I've seen for blood pressure, for BMI, for glucose, same thing. Once you get in these large epidemiological studies without adjustments, once you get into the normal to low range, you see this tail of mortality going up for all of these things. But that doesn't mean you want your glucose to be high, your blood pressure to be high. It has to be that there's an underlying disease causing these things to be lower.
Yeah. Sick people get low cholesterol.
Here's an example of what I mean. This is a really powerful visual. So the black curve with that gray shade, right, black and gray, that's cholesterol, LDL cholesterol. So it kind of makes the shape of the letter U. So with very high cholesterol, we see more death. And then in the middle, kind of middle range of cholesterol, maybe a little bit high, we see the lowest death. And then with low cholesterol or normal cholesterol even, we see high death again. It goes up again. We already looked at what happens when you adjust these curves for malnutrition or chronic disease. But here's the same curve for hemoglobin A1c. That's glycated hemoglobin, so an average of glucose levels. That's the red and pink curve. It also makes a sort of a U or a V, right? The lowest point where you see the lowest mortality, this is about 6.5% hemoglobin A1c. That's diabetes and prediabetes range. So lower than that, so normal glucose levels, normal hemoglobin A1c levels, we see higher risk of death. That's anyone who's healthy. I'm much lower than this. So it's the same exact phenomenon, the same exact curves that we see with cholesterol. And the last one is blood pressure, the purple curve. Same exact thing. It makes sort of a U or sort of a V. The lowest point is about maybe 130, 140 millimeters mercury. This is systolic blood pressure. But this isn't a very good blood pressure. Recommended now is under 120. 140 is already like stage 2 hypertension. So these curves are showing that everybody below that, which is considered healthy blood pressure, have higher risk of dying. So is the conclusion here that we should try to have high blood pressure and high glucose levels and be hypertensive and be diabetic? Of course not. These curves are an artifact of old age and chronic disease and malnutrition in those settings. Most people who die in our society tend to be older, and they often have these diseases. They have cancers, they have infections, they have frailty, they lose weight, and so that causes their blood pressure and their glucose and their cholesterol to come down during that disease stage or that old age, more frail stage, and that creates this association between these lower markers and death. We know it's not cause and effect, because if you lower glucose or blood pressure or cholesterol with healthy lifestyle or with medication in people who need it, we see lower mortality. We see lower risk of death when these things are corrected, right? We don't see people dying more when these things are fixed. So this has to be a spurious association. It has to be an artifact. And we know it is because we already saw that when you adjust it for chronic disease or malnutrition, that effect goes away. And it's a kind of an interesting aspect of our society, although an unfortunate aspect, that throughout most of our adult lives, when we are middle-aged, give or take 30s, 40s, 50s, our body weight tends to be a little too high, blood pressure a little too high, cholesterol a little too high, etc. For most people, for the average Westerner, right? And most people don't die during those years. And so that corresponds to this lowest point of the graph. Most people are not dying, and yet their cholesterol and blood pressure and glucose is not great. And then later in life, 60, 70, 80, a lot of times they have these chronic diseases like cancers or chronic infections and frailty, and they lose weight and they become more frail, and some of these metrics come down. The BMI comes down, the blood pressure comes down, the glucose comes down, the cholesterol comes down, and those are the phases where they tend to die at this later period, right? So it creates this association between the lower metrics and the higher risk of death. And that produces this weird tail of the graph, which when we adjust for malnutrition and chronic disease, that tail goes away. So bottom line, in a healthy individual without a chronic disease, having glucose in the normal range and blood pressure in the normal range and cholesterol in the normal range is a good thing. It's better for your health, and if anything, it's better for your risk of death. It keeps it lower. Unfortunately, those people are the minority in our society. How can we bring down our cholesterol and our glucose in a healthy way? I actually just published a video going over that in detail. I cut my cholesterol and my ApoB in half, and I covered all of it. Check it out right here, and I'll meet you in there.